Myles Allen, a professor of geosystem science at Oxford University, from where he joins us. Myles, thanks for
Good
joining us
evening.
on this. And, viewers have been watching these back and forth negotiations, hammering out multiple versions of the deal before the deal. It's really just a draft at this point. So break it down for us. Do we expect phasing out of fossil fuels and subsidies to make it into the final deal?
That's the really interesting one that has emerged. They seem to have stuck with this phrase, ending inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. That's been in successive drafts of the text. So I think most people are expecting it probably will survive to the final text. You should be clear what they're offering to do is to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies.
Right.
I mean, a few people are cynically saying, well, what do they mean? What are efficient fossil fuel subsidies? But, that's a word that's clearly been put in there to sort of just soothe some potentially wounded feelings about this. This should have been done years ago. I mean, as John Kerry pointed out, I mean, subsidizing fossil fuel use these days is almost the definition of madness. I mean, you're subsidizing something that's killing the planet. So that's something we clearly should do. It's a very clear, obvious outcome of this COP. But crucially, it's something now that all countries have agreed to do if this does make it through to the final text. And amazingly, it's the first time that fossil fuels have actually been mentioned in a COP draft. This is COP 26. There have been 25 other COPs. And finally, we're acknowledging the basic truth that needs to be confronted, which is we have to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes somewhat cynically funny that people laud just using that language in a draft as a victory when, come on. I mean, by now human beings should be able to say what the problem is, but that shows how touchy a situation this is in the face of an extremely urgent problem. While people are hashing out one word here or there and fighting over it, the planet continues to warm. So how close do you think we're going to get to keeping the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius?
Well, that's clearly going to be incredibly challenging. I mean, we're at 1.2 degrees already, warming at almost a quarter of a degree per decade. It'll be, not sometime in the 2030s at the rate we're going that we'll reach 1.5 degrees. And you don't need a climate model or an elaborate scenario to realize if we don't hit the brakes immediately and start to slow global warming, we're not going to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. That's a simple fact. But we could do it, and we still could do it. But what we need is clarity from governments and, above all, from companies around the world about where we're going. Because in the end, countries don't cause emissions. Companies, individuals, they're the ones who emit greenhouse gases. And we need clarity from governments so that individuals and, above all, companies can make clearer decisions going forward to stop dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as soon as possible. If we could stop dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by 2050, we would have a fighting chance of keeping global temperatures to at least close to 1.5 degrees. And we could do that. Ironically, the global fossil fuel industry is making so much money at the moment with oil prices high, gas prices sky high, they could afford to stop global warming. And we have to bring that industry into the tent, bring their resources to bear on stopping the product they sell from causing global warming. They could do it, but that means saying the word fossil fuels more often in COPs.
Yes. And, on the one hand, you have some saying, depending on what side of this you're on, your view of it, some say this is a victory, that certain things have happened and certain deals were made, especially between countries like the US and China. And the other side among activists saying this was an abject failure. In brief, tell us which side you are closest to in your assessment of this COP.
At the end of the day, it was always going to be a mistake to bill this as, the last chance to save the planet or world's great climate conference. At the end of the day, this conference was always going to be a bit of a footnote to the Paris Climate Agreement. But of course, my prime minister wouldn't want to be a footnote, still less a footnote in French. So he bigged this up as this massively important moment for the world. It's progress. We are moving the ball along. And it's important to recognize the progress that has been made. Only 15 years ago, myself and a colleague first pointed out that it wasn't going to be enough to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, particularly carbon dioxide, to 50 or 80% of where we were then. We were going to have to reduce them to net zero. And we even suggested a limit on the total amount of carbon we could afford to dump in the atmosphere in order to limit warming to 2 degrees. Now, if pledges which have been made at this COP are met, and that's a big if because countries have been pretty vague on how they're going to do it, then we look like quite likely to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees. That's not enough for 1.5 degrees. And many people have realized since then that the impacts of climate change are so bad, we have to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, to that more ambitious goal.
Yeah.
We're not there yet, but we're at least making progress.
And at least now countries, leaders are forced to talk about it and can no longer hide from the wrong that they allow. Myles, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.